Good evening and welcome to this episode of Biz First in Focus. I'm your host this evening, Shaheen Jurampati, and today's topic is quite simple but rather complex. The three words: the cost of living. Well, is your cost of living too high or is it relatively low? How easy is it to construct a house? How affordable is it to own a car? Well, to give us these answers, we are joined by the Chief Operating Officer at Advocate Institute, which is a free market think tank, Bernard Fernando. Bernard, thank you very much for joining us on the show this evening.
Thank you very much, Shaheen, for having me.
Bernard, simple question. Advocate, which you said is a free market think tank organization, launched a food tax tracker, I believe last year. So what are the observations that your organization has come up with this tracker?
Interestingly, Shaheen, cost of living is high in Sri Lanka, and you will be surprised even by the time we launched the tracker and even up to now. I'll give you a simple example. The chicken prices, and chicken is no more a luxury food item. Chicken is expensive in Sri Lanka than Malaysia, and Malaysia is richer 2.4 times than us, and their chicken prices are 20% cheaper than Sri Lankan prices, and that's just one example. And we have massive taxes on food items, making it more expensive for our Sri Lankans to eat. So it's still very high comparatively. That's why people are troubling with cost of living. And even if you look at the multinationals, the food multinationals bottom line, you can see in the last quarter there's a drop in their turnover about 5%. I'm talking about not like luxury food item companies. I don't want to mention the names, of course, for branding reasons, but the ice cream manufacturers, the noodles manufacturers, their bottom line has been dropped by about 5%. That means people are having affected by this high cost of living, and one main reason is taxation. Of course, before the budget last year, there were in certain food items the tax has been brought down, but actually what happened was our currency depreciated by about 25%. Because of the currency depreciation, people felt that very badly. And you mean when you have the currency depreciation, that means everyone sort of getting poor. So because of that, that pressure has not been yet taken off from the people. So even according to the food tracker, it's still high from our end when we track it. And of course, government sometimes they do ad hoc changes, which of course difficult to track, but we have been tracking it. But so far it's high.
Bernard, not too long ago on the same program on Biz First in Focus, I interviewed with this gentleman, and I asked him about how certain food items have been classed, so to speak. And I read an article and I asked him about this. The article said that items like butter, cheese and certain types of milk have been classified as luxury foods. So what is the opposite of luxury food? Like, for example, rice, someone could call it poor food. So how can we justify this? How do we classify actual normal food and just say it's food?
Exactly. So that's the same problem that we have, because this sometimes in the statistics they classify it, the dal, the rice, those are the essential food items, sprouts, and they think the other, even chicken, the other food items are luxury food items. That's not anymore, because we are a middle income country and we have to taken care of the nutrition value that we take, the protein content that we take. So that's very unfair. And to give you an example, now the higher taxes on maize and soya beans has costed chicken prices high, and at the same time, if you look at for the last couple of years, the wheat prices has been going down in terms of market value, and we are not producing or cultivating wheat here, but we have massive taxes on wheat, flour, about 85% total, but we have a lower tax on wheat grain, about 23%. So what has happened is, in economics you call it a rent, because so what happens, so the wheat millers, they only get the grain and they mill it to flour, and they, without adding any value, they keep a rent. So because of that, our bread and flour based product range is slightly expensive. So if government have a proper tax system, they could have actually have an impact on the cost of living, because 85% on wheat flour, which is not you are producing even in Sri Lanka. If you are producing it, at least you can justify that. Even if you are not producing it, how can you justify 85% tax on wheat flour and 23% on wheat grain? So one miller just earning a rent because of this discrimination on tax policy.
interesting that you say that, Anand. Now, I'm going to ask the all-important question now. Now that you've made these observations and now that you have found these findings more or less, have these matters been addressed to the government, which are the sole regulators of this whole industry?
Of course, we have as a think tank, as any time if we come across with an opportunity, we have brought this up and we have done a video on this. How much do you pay on your taxes on a piece of cake, which is about 40%, which is very unfair, we thought. So we have brought this up, but in certain cases near the budget there was a tax reduction on certain food items, but with the currency depreciation and even the government spending, and I think they have not set a good example on trying to reduce their expenditure, because this taxation reduction and to communicate a proper message to public, I think first they also have to set an example. So without taking the lead from their end, I think if you ask people to cut down the expenses, that would be very unfair and that would not be appealing from the public's perspective.
Bernard, you have been advocating for freer trade and less protectionist taxes. Let's first get the air cleared out on this. Could you explain what exactly protectionist taxes are?
Yes, basically, Shaheen, sometimes you can have a tax on two reasons. One is to generate revenue. So for an instance, something on tobacco, you can generate revenue when you have it. When you import, the more you import, you get more revenue into the government.
As well.
Exactly. And on the other hand, you can have a tax to protect certain things. For an instance, the best example that I can give you is now wall tiles and floor tiles. If you get the cascaded, the entire tax is about 107%. So what you are doing is you stop your imports, because you can import, but when you import, it will, imagine a tile, just piece of tile is 100 rupees. When it crossing the border, it will be about 207 rupees. So then it just become uncompetitive in the market when it imports. So with that, you are not generating a profit, or you are not generating any money, because people won't import when you have such high taxes. Absolutely. So that's called a protectionist tax. Now what we are trying to say is, on construction we have heavily protected industry, and what I just brought you is wall tiles and floor tiles, 107% protectionism taxes with cess, with VAT, with PAL, and everything come on top of the other. So that we thought very unfair for the poor people.
But now there's the same principle apply to vehicles, to obviously imported vehicles.
Yes. On vehicles also the same tax applies. But at least what they say is, when you have more vehicles, it contributes for the congestion, which I think up to an extent at least you can justify. But of course, we don't think there has to be, that should be the only policy for congestion. There has to be many more things that you can do. Infrastructure development, public transport development, those things could be done. But this protectionism taxes is a big problem in the Sri Lankan economy, and that is impacting the poor. That's the important thing, because people think when you have protectionism taxes, that helps the local people, that helps the poor people, but that is not. The reality is it impacting, it hammering the poor. Mr. Pereira and Mrs. Pereira, the laymen are the one who is getting suffered from this protectionism taxes.
Well, why not? We're also going for a short commercial break. Stay with Bees First in Focus. We're talking to Dhananand Fernando, the Chief Operating Officer at Advocate Institute. We're talking about the cost of living. See you right back. Hello, welcome back. You're watching Bees First in Focus here on TV1, and we're talking to Dhananand Fernando, the Chief Operating Officer at Advocate Institute, and we're talking about the cost of living in everyday life at a general household. Dhananand, before we went in for the break, we were talking about construction, more or less, tiles, and then we're talking about the high prices imposed on vehicles. Let's talk about the whole vehicle situation we have in the country. And you said at least the government has a justifiable reason to impose a high amount of taxes. But then what is the justifiable reason for high taxes imposed on building material? As you said, just recently the price of a bag of cement was increased by an additional 30 rupees. And right now it's 960 rupees, just one bag of cement.
Exactly. I don't see a reason basically why we have such heavy protectionism taxes. Generally the logic or the reason that the government brings out is to protect the local industries. Now generally in economics there's a argument called the local industry protection, since if you are like an infant industry, if you just started as an industry, you just give sort of a protectionism with a tariff till it gets established in the market. But if you look at the industries that they have heavy protectionism, one is steel industry, which is about steel is about 81% protectionism taxes. And for how long have we been doing in steel? And tiles, wall tiles and floor tiles about 107%. Then the tiles 107%, steel 81%, and then the sanitary ware, that's the commodes, the squatting pans, about 72%. And for how many years that we have been doing this? And because of that, we have about 60% higher cost in construction in Sri Lanka than the region. So I'm just talking about not the big apartments or big constructions. It's for common people. It costs about 60% higher than the region when you do a construction. So I don't see any reason why, unless if it's a political reason, why you really want to protect these particular selected industries at such high rates. 107% is completely unbelievable figure. 81% on steel, and steel is, you know, this steel is not a luxury, you know, in construction to do a small concrete, anything, it's a basic thing is steel. So you have 81% protectionism, which is unbelievable. And we have to also calculate the cost, because generally people take a housing loan to construct their houses, and you being a youngster and your friends who work at banks know how much people suffer on repaying their housing loan. That means all this extra protectionism has been, you know, people have to suffer their entire life. You know, housing loan is about 10 years, 15 years. These are long-term financial commitments, and you suffer your entire life just to entertain few people, and this is completely unbelievable tax policy, and I think it's very unfair in the eyes of poor people. I reiterate this word poor because sometimes people try to mainstream, okay, these are good for big people, those who build apartments, they are the one who are benefiting, but actually not.
It applies to everyone.
It applies to everyone.
It's ironic, isn't it, Dhananath, because this government came into power during the campaign trail. They said we're coming into power to make everyone livable in this country, right? And alleviation, poverty, so on and so forth. Everyone will be able to own a house. Everyone will be able to own a car. But right now, like from what you're telling me, 107%, 81%, these are all staggering figures, which are quite giving the shivers down my spine, right? And right now, as you say, it's almost impossible to construct your own house, which is driving people to live on rent or get into a flat or get into loans by getting an apartment. So let's say this is 2018. Come 2025, I'm not going to ask how possible is it going to be. I'm going to ask how impossible is it going to be to construct your own house.
Exactly, it will be very difficult if we were to continue with this trend. But also we have to remember, these were not now. This has been for so many years. It was not like last 2 or 3 years. This has been from, you know, for a couple of number of years. So that means people have been paying for this for a long time. And also I would like to highlight the Sri Lankan housing statistics as well. We have about 300,000 families who just live in shanties. That's about our general size of a household is about 3.9 person per family. Yeah. So that means approximately about 1.2 million people live in shanties. About another 1 million live in temporary houses, and about another 3 million I think live in partly constructed houses. So that's the statistics. And then you have this high cost of construction on top of that, and how far that is. And of course, if we were to continue this trend, I'm sure it will be nearly impossible to consider, even think of building a house in 2020 and 2025. And the other thing that you have to remember is that also when you have such high cost of construction, you are cutting down the other industries. When you have to spend more on housing, you have to cut that expenditure on something else. Yes. So that means you will be cut down on curtains. that means you will be cutting down on your furniture. That means you will be cutting down even on education.
It's a ripple effect.
It's a ripple effect. So you are, by having these taxes, you are actually you are having a massive impact on the entire economy. It's same on food items. When you have to pay high cost on food, that means you have to cut it down from somewhere else. That could be your clothing, that could be something else, that means you are cutting down all the industries, and that has a, as you very correctly said, ripple effect, and that has a long-term effect on the entire economy. It's not like one particular segment of construction.
Just like you said, Dhananath, now we are focusing. Let's talk about, now you said people are living in partially constructed houses, right? Let's put it aside. Let's keep that in the back of our heads. Now let's talk about the situation that these people have to go through while living in these partially constructed houses, right? Now just not too long ago, if I recall, Advocata held an event, and Mr. Murtaza Jefferji gave a lecture, and he said that basic things like chocolates are heavily taxed. Could you give us some other examples that the general public of Sri Lanka pay overly exorbitant amount of taxes for common food items, very common food items? Some examples. Now you mentioned chicken. Chicken is, of course, I suppose people consider it luxury here in Sri Lanka, but let's talk about other common basic commodities in Sri Lanka.
Yeah, if you look at chocolate is one, butter is one, flour is one, the wheat flour is one, the coconut oil is one, and even some fruit items like apples, the pears, the oranges, which cannot be cultivated here. Few are the examples. And the important thing is this higher protectionism taxes, very interestingly. There is a list called negative list at the BOI. Negative list means you can import, but you will have a cess on top of that, which makes your import tax very high, or import cost very high. Now if you look at, there are about 30 items in this negative list, and most of these items are related to construction industry. That includes the telephone wires, the electronic items, the PVC doors, the PVC items, all the electric material which uses in construction. All these construction materials are in this 30 long negative list. So that is why the cost of construction is high in one end. At the same time, you have higher taxes on food items, and that is also hampering on cost of living. And the important thing is, the government earned about 55 billion from special commodity levy, which is the main tax on food. And you will be surprised, now while they earned about 55 billion in 2016 on special commodity levy, they lost about 28 billion on Sri Lankan Airlines. That's half of it what they earned from special commodity levy, and that's only on Sri Lankan Airlines. Do you know how many state-owned enterprises we have? I don't think even the government knows. They have approximately about 200 odd state-owned enterprises. And according to the research that we did, Advocata some time ago, that's in 2016, for the last 10 years they lost about 636 billion rupees cumulative on state-owned enterprises, and Sri Lankan only lost 28 billion last year, and they collected only 55 billion on special commodity levy. Now you can understand the situation. The taxes that we pay, where it is going through the drain. And the Auditor General reported a 15 billion rice scam, another 4 billion coal scam in Auditor General's report. And all the taxes that we are paying is going for these rice scams and coal scams.
Cover up the scams.
Exactly, and cover the losses of state-owned enterprises. And that's why people are feeling very difficult to live, because the tax that you collect has no impact.
Well, Dhananath, we have to go in for another short commercial break, and Dhananath says the general public are paying for the sins of others. For this is Newsfirst in Focus. See you on the other side of the short commercial break. Welcome back. You are watching an interesting episode of Newsfirst in Focus here on TV1. I'm joined by Dhananath Fernando, the Chief Operating Officer at Advocata Institute, and he was saying how the general public are paying for the sins of others, likely such as the Sri Lankan Airlines losses, the coal scams, so on and so forth, which has more or less resulted in the exorbitant taxes imposed on common commodities which are consumed by the general public. Dhananath, now let's talk about the whole paying for the sins again. So when is it time now this government has 2 more years to remain in power and 3 years have already elapsed. The question still remains how many promises they've actually fulfilled. So how do you think they can get their act together within these last 2 years to get on track and make sure that the people feel that they are relieved, that they feel that they're getting some sort of concession?
Exactly. So now what we have to see what we can do to actually at least to make the situation a little bit better. So it's very difficult to say since there are elections also has been scheduled this year and till 2020, because generally when there are elections, let's agree on the reality, politicians come and say, okay, I'll give this, I'll give that, and I'll give, you know, all these of fancy.
Sri Lankan political system.
Exactly. And I think I would like to remind people, once they say that, you have to remember one thing, this any politicians or any government, they don't generate money. It's our money, they collect it and distribute. So as long as they come and say we will do this, remember it's not a magic money. It's that they have no money, and government from the government revenue they spend 50% to cover the pensions and the salaries of the government workers. Another 36% goes to cover the debt servicing and the interest. So that means out of the revenue, 86% you have to just keep aside for government expenditure, that is salaries plus debt servicing, and you have only 14% for all the other expenses. So there is no way that you can give away many things. So what government has to do right now is first at least set up an example from the top. And you can't expect people to fasten their seat belts when you spend, the government spend lavishly. I'll just give you a few examples. Now it was reported by the parliament, just to have a session on parliament, it cost about I think 4 million rupees per session. But we saw the ministers, they are not even participating properly. So that gives a public a bad signal that we have been asked to fasten the seat belts, and you are spending 4 million rupees of money just for one session, and you are not even taking part on the proper discussions. So that gives people, they don't feel how tough is the situation. And for the last 10 years, the government, now we have about 1.3 million government workers, and for the last 10 years they increased about 500,000 government workers, and now all the entire 20 million people have to bear the cost of these people, the pension. Exactly. So there is no room for government expansion, and you know, I'm sure there will be good government workers, but it has been inefficient, and I think unanimously we all agree, and it's not entirely on their fault. Of course there are many other faults in the system, but ultimately it has been a burden for the economy. So what we have to do is cut these taxes down, at least to give public a little relief, because those are not revenue generating taxes. Those are, one side is protectionism taxes. You asked about chocolates, and of course biscuit is 107% taxed, and soap is about again 94.8% protectionism tax. Of course soap is not that you spend a lot of money on soap, but when you collect everything together, it comes to a significant amount. So government can, first step is that they can give sort of a relief, because since these are not the revenue generation taxes, at least government can give a relief on those items. And people have to understand there is no room for more subsidies or more things from the government when it comes to elections. And going to elections will also have an impact, because ultimately people, all the fancy election campaigns that they see, all the flags that they see, all the TV commercials that they see, that's generally somehow coming to impact the general public's wallet. So that's sad indeed, and I think people have to understand the reality first.
Dharanath, another ironic point which we're talking about is this government, when they came into power, now before I said that they came into power saying Sri Lanka will be livable for everyone, poverty will be alleviated, so on and so forth. The question is, now we're talking about, you said these protectionism taxes are all to protect the local farmers and the local manufacturers. Now the question is, fine if you're doing this, but if it is working, the question is it working? Is it protecting the local manufacturers, the local farmers?
You can see that especially on the subsidies and on the farmers. Now you know the rice farmers, they have been in poor as long as you remember. Can you remember farmers came and said, okay, now we have been prospered because of this subsidy? Nothing has happened. And what we believe is, if you really want to protect the local industries, make them competitive. That's the only solution. By trying to protect, you will not be really protecting them. You will be putting them, pushing them to an extreme corner. Now, if that's the case, now journalists like you are competing with the entire world, and now when the show is aired, you know how heavy is the competition. Now, people have the choice. They can just
switch off a button,
and they can. You are not only competing with news, you are competing with entertainment, you are competing with sports, everything. And I think if that's the case, people like you have the utmost right to come on street and say, please stop all these foreign news channels and all. But you don't do it. But you are competing. And from internet, you have a competition. Now you have different sources of mediums, and journalists are competing. And there are other many industries who are competing. Apparel industry is competing. Banks are competing. While government is backing certain state banks. So while everyone is competing, it's very unfair that you are trying to protect very few industries, and that also leads to corruption, because once you know that one industry is being protected, next time someone else will go and say, okay, if you are protecting this particular group, why can't us? So you are making the entire system unproductive, and so far as you see, this protectionism hasn't worked. The best example is the rice farmers, and the others you see sometimes a short-term gain, but in long run you don't see they are exporting or they are joining, contributing for the export economy. And we have a massive target of going for about a 20 billion exports in 2025. Which this protectionism industries is not contributing. I don't think by protecting the tiles, people from here will try to export tiles to India or anywhere else, and we don't see that. If we are seeing that, that trend has to come out. And when you have heavy import taxes, it's indirectly you are taxing the exports, and these are two correlated two dynamics variables, and by protecting, I don't think.
So there are multiple committees to regulate these problems, to look in. There are cabinet committees, there are parliamentary committees. So what is the outcome of these committees? Is this the outcome of these committees, of these multiple committees?
That's an honest question that I have. They have like multiple committees, and the results has been very disappointing. And I don't think anymore the committees will work. It's the deeds has to work. You have to walk your talk. However, there are certain positive sides as well. The only positive that I can see is there's a positive primary balance. That means now the government earning is at least covering your daily or their current expenditure, which is a positive sign. But to maintain that will not be easy given the election agenda which is unfolding till 2020.
Dhananath, to wrap up, in the next 15 years, given the current situation, in your personal opinion, where do you see Sri Lanka's standing in terms of economy, in terms of cost of living? How easy or how difficult will it be for a general person, for a middle income person to own a vehicle or a car in the next 15 years? Let's not have it next 2 years, 3 years, 4 years, 5 years, 15 years. Personally, where do you see it?
If we were to continue the same trend, it will be very difficult, and people like you and I will consider migrating for sure if this trend will continuing. And you can see that you asked 5 of your friends who really want to live in this country if the same trend continues, and they all want to migrate, and they are looking for job opportunities, education opportunities overseas. And even if you look at the statistics, that's quite clear. And if you were to continue the same trend, there will be no future for sure in Sri Lanka. But even if you change right now, at least there will be a bit of a hope. Not be even for generation that you and I represent, but at least for our children's generation, there will be a bit of a hope if we at least try to change the direction right now. That's today, not tomorrow.
Well, Dhananath, I'm not sure if I should thank you or not for giving me those kind words. Well, Dhananath Fernando, the Chief Operating Officer at Advocate Institute. Well, the bottom line is things aren't looking that good for Sri Lanka. And brace yourselves, get a horse, because you might not be able to own a vehicle. This has been Newsfirst in Focus. I'm Shahan Jarampati. Good night and take care.